Oh, hello, everyone, and welcome to our series, Port to Porch, bringing innovations to the freight mobility ecosystem. My name is Craig Toth, and I'm a Vice President of HNTB with a focus on new and emerging mobility solutions. I also lead our national freight mobility practice. HNTB is an engineering consulting firm in the transportation space. We serve infrastructure owners, both public and private, in all phases of programs and projects, from visioning and planning to design and oversight of implementation and long-term operations. We're thrilled to be working in partnership with CoMotion to have discussions and bring forward trends, identified needs, and innovative solutions around goods movement. This is a continuation of the collaborative discussions at CoMotion Miami that will culminate with CoMotion LA next month, so stay tuned. If you are joining us today, this is more than likely an area that is high up on your priority list, or at least one of high visibility and impact. We can safely say that it's certainly now for many consumers, including individuals, businesses, and other entities that rely on receiving goods, many that are critical to the quality of life and operational efficiencies. Prior to the pandemic, we were already seeing an uptick in online ordering, but due to people needing to operate exclusively from their homes, this escalated, and the growth of e-commerce now outpaces retail sales growth overall. We are accustomed to receiving items at our doorstep within a day, and when we do not, it draws attention. Add the pandemic effects to the equation, including manufacturing slowdowns, supply shortages, and workforce gaps, and it has become abundantly clear that we need to move expeditiously in making this ecosystem more robust and resilient than ever before. Technology innovation is playing a critical role in this. Many states are highly focused on this as an economic driver and necessity. As an example, the Texas Department of Transportation recently released its Freight Network Technology and Operations Plan. This plan addresses applications that can improve multimodal freight mobility and safety. The success of these types of plans must align public sector investment with the private sector needs to meet the state and nation's overall economic goals. As I said, today is the continuation of the series. The last time we had representatives from ports and AV trucking. Today, we will look at partnerships and continue to delve into the ecosystem. We have a terrific panel for you today representing government, the private sector, and academia. And without further ado, I'd like to thank them for joining us today and ask each of them to introduce themselves and their organizations to you. But before we do that, I want to point out that there is a chat feature and a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to weigh in. First, I'd like to introduce Kevin Wasik, Head of Business Development, UPS Flight Forward. Kevin?
Hey, Craig, thank you. My name is Kevin Wasik, Head of Business Development, UPS Flight Forward. UPS Flight Forward is a drone airline within UPS, and we've been charged to figure out how drones can deliver what matters at UPS. And when we think about what matters, we think about scope and scale. UPS delivers over 30 million packages per day. We service over 220 countries. And Flight Forward is really digging deep to understand how this emerging technology can impact local business, communities, and of course, our customers. In 2019, UPS was tapped by the FAA to help integrate drones into the National Airspace System. So now we're validating the tech, operating procedures, and testing whether or not there's community acceptance. We have over 10,000 flights to date. We service CVS, a hospital in North Carolina called Atrium Health. And one of our newest priorities is accelerating the deployment of electrified aircraft and small feeder aircraft. So, Craig, I look forward to sharing more on that today.
Thanks, Kevin. Next, I'd like to introduce Kelly Rula, Director of Policy and Partnerships, Urban Freight Lab, University of Washington.
Hey, Craig, thanks for having me. Kelly Rula here. I recently left the Seattle Department of Transportation for the Urban Freight Lab at the University of Washington. And a little bit about what UFL is. I'll kind of refer to it that way throughout. So we are a really innovative research center housed at the University of Washington. We have private sector members that include everyone from our friends at UPS, Kevin, and Amazon to Bosch, real estate companies, and other technology companies, bringing them to the table with our public sector partners, such as Seattle DOT, which is our strongest partner, and having conversations about the urban freight ecosystem and how we can kind of lend that public-private academic lens to a lot of the challenges and opportunities coming about in this space. So we really do focus on last mile delivery, kind of done a lot of innovative work in the final 50 feet space. So you can find that on our website, but really defining kind of what happens from the curb to the final point of the packages left. So I'm excited to dive into multimodal, the ecosystem of multimodal today.
Thank you. And finally, we have Trevor Pawl, Chief Mobility Officer, State of Michigan. Trevor?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It is great to be here today. And this is like one of my favorite topics because it's so relevant. I think COVID exposed the supply chain bottlenecks that we have. And now, thank God for AV and electrification solutions, smart city solutions, because I think we're able to navigate a lot of those bottlenecks because of the industry, the technology, and the progression of that industry and technology. So I'm the Chief Mobility Officer for the state of Michigan. As far as I know, I'm the only state Chief Mobility Officer. And really the goal of my role is to storytell, talk about what's going on in Michigan, but I also lead the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, which really has two shops within it. The first shop is policy focused and creating regulatory rights of way for the future of transportation. And then the other side, the other shop focuses on signature projects that future-proof our infrastructure. We believe infrastructure is currency, where maybe last century we thought of infrastructure as like the space between investment. We actually think now it's the backbone of investment. And so we try to do things, obviously, that present proof, such as install charging stations, make sure there's limited potholes on the road, and keep making sure our infrastructure are things that are drivable. But then also thinking about what is the future of autonomous vehicles? Could we build an autonomous vehicle corridor? And so we're doing that between Detroit and Ann Arbor. Or what would it look like if a road charged an electric vehicle as it's in motion? So we're building the first mile of that technology in Detroit, or looking at the future of parking, future of airports, all of which touch freight, B2B activity. And I'm really happy to be here. So with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. And that's a great segue into the first conversation. So we've seen specific applications of technology for freight mobility, automation being key, as you said. Michigan's also looking at the specific freight corridors that you mentioned. Can you describe some of the exciting innovations you're applying to the longer haul connected corridors, and how you see this rolling out on a broader scale, maybe that modern highway freight network?
Yeah, sure. So I can start with the Cavenue project. So the driverless vehicle corridor I just mentioned is a partnership we have with a company called Cavenue, which spun out of Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, which is the infrastructure investment arm of Alphabet. And so we just announced 29 miles along Interstate 94, which is a very strategic vector of commerce between Detroit and I would say 70% of the economy in some way touches that corridor in Michigan. And over the last decade, we had seen a buildup of innovative hardware solutions, things that helped us track backup queues, weather conditions. And we also have world-class testing sites, the American Center for Mobility, University of Michigan's along that corridor, our airports along that corridor. So we saw the opportunity to string those different assets together through this 40-mile corridor, which really is meant to be the road of the future that blends physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and then interoperability across 40+ communities. And that's important. The data that you're pulling, the systems that you're using to operate this road of the future need to work for governments, planners, fleet operators. And so the interoperability part is maybe the most important of the different things that road will entail. And so we picked the interstate because we feel like the freight case is one of the easiest to make. There's reliability there. The technology, we believe, has been proven not only in Michigan, but across, you look at what's happening in Arizona and Texas, and some of the companies we're already talking to are looking at that corridor as a very strategic corridor between the US and Canada. It aligns very nicely with other assets that we have, like a new bridge that we're building between Detroit and Canada, and some of the smart infrastructure that we're going to be installing there. So we think it's going to be a competitive advantage, but we also don't think it's going to be the only road. That's like in 10 years, 20 years, we could see other roads, whether it's at the Port of Long Beach or other key sort of commerce corridors, having the same types of technology, but being inspired by what's happening in Michigan. Like, let's be honest, we have been over the last century because, we're the home of the 3-color traffic signal, the first paved road. So there's a responsibility here in Michigan to not only focus on the vehicle, but the environment around the vehicle.
Thanks. Kevin, you have a unique use case for the last mile delivery using drones, both abroad and here in the US. Can you share these and touch on some of the unique demographics served, as well as the suburban and rural areas?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I guess the industry segment that UPS has been focused on is healthcare. Healthcare is a $5 billion plus segment for UPS, and the payloads and the needs of the customer are fairly unique. There's a lot more dependency on speed and reliability. A lot of these payloads are time and temperature sensitive. Some of them have really high values. And a lot of these shipments can impact the patient experience and even outcomes. I remember a story back when I was in healthcare strategy where a medical device was needed for a gentleman that was having a heart attack. And this particular device wasn't available. And the alternative to a device that was kind of a stent that was injected into the groin up into the heart area was actually to crack open the chest and take a different procedure. So not having the right inventory at the right place at the right time can have really serious consequences for the community, for patients, and for outcomes. So UPS, having a strong focus on healthcare since 2016, we've been partnered with Zipline. Zipline is a manufacturer and operator of small UAS. Our partnership has been focused mostly in Africa. We started by delivering blood packets, emergency blood infusions to women who had just given birth. And without this drone delivery, these women could have had a very fatal outcome. And so what drones are doing in Africa are really expanding healthcare to underserved communities. The airspace in Africa is relatively less complex compared to the US, so it's a little easier to deploy. But here in the US, since 2020, at the height of the pandemic, UPS partnered with CVS, and we began using drone delivery in the retirement community called the Villages in Florida, home to 135,000 seniors. And back when the risks were high for the elderly community, this drone program, this rapid delivery of prescriptions, helped these community members remain healthy at home. So we were using drones for the first time in that environment here in the States for healthcare prescriptions. The community feedback within the villages has been excellent, surprisingly so. So when you think about different demographics, you would expect a younger generation to be more welcoming to emerging technology. And we were actually shocked that this community in the villages were really excited to participate in drone delivery. There are always naysayers, there always will be. Here at UPS, community outreach is a big part of our go forward strategy, making sure that we're gaining that community acceptance through education and making sure that we're taking the right approach when it comes to operational safety. UPS as a top brand, we're ranked number 89 on the Fortune 500. So for us, we have to protect that brand, and safety is a value. So these small scale pilots, whether it be in the villages or Africa, allow us to develop the safe operating procedures that this technology needs to really scale.
Thanks, Kevin. So we've heard about the corridors, we've heard about the drone delivery and other opportunities around the medical field, which is definitely fascinating and critical as we continue to deploy this, and the safety aspects. But the urban landscape presents unique opportunities, not only for the last mile, but for the last 50 feet, as Kelly described in her introduction. So you're engaged in a number of unique technology applications that we were talking about earlier last week. And can you describe some of these, as well as what we need to do to move from research and pilots into full-scale deployment?
Sure, yeah. And it's kind of fun that I got to see kind of from the Seattle DOT side, and now I get to be on the research side. So I've been involved in a lot of these, wearing different hats. But yeah, a few things to hit on that I think are really interesting, kind of how we approach, how the lab approaches problem statements and our research. You know, we're trying to not just test technology for technology's sake, right? We're trying to kind of solve a problem, right? So reducing dwell time, reducing people looking for parking and circling around, which leads to higher emissions and congestion, things like that. So we try to take those kind of a framing when we look at what type of a technology could help us solve those problems, and then let's really assess it and kind of take that research lens. And what I really love about the UFL is that they really focus on applied research. So they like to do things out in the field. They like to collect data, and kind of, you know, there'll be grad students out with a clipboard, but that oftentimes can provide a rich set of kind of data that's really never been looked at before, because, you know, time consuming, expensive, and things like that. So that's why I do like the research side. So a few things to touch on. We've done some work looking at the final 50 feet, thinking about common carrier lockers, which are quite more popular in Europe. A lot of these things we'll talk about are maybe happening in Europe at a bit of an accelerated pace. But the idea that, you know, you've seen Amazon lockers at your 7-Eleven, but the idea of a locker shared or used by multiple carriers, right, to put packages in. Now, there's challenges and opportunities with that, but it is something that's happening a little bit more at scale in Europe. So the UFL has put in multiple different applications of these common carrier lockers and done testing of reducing the time that it takes, for example, in a large commercial high rise, if a delivery driver needs to move to multiple floors, if you had a locker in the basement or the ground floor, which you often see in apartment complexes now, that can really reduce a lot of cost and time. So there's a lot of great benefit there. So we've done some great work there. Another pilot we recently did was we partnered with using our member network. So we had a reef surface parking lot. We worked with Coaster Cycles, who is a electric cargo bike OEM manufacturer. We worked with BrightDrop, General Motors electric vehicle arm. And we basically we did a micro hub on their lot. We had a storage container where we kept the bike for charging. And we did a pilot, like a very kind of, again, rigorous pilot, but with only one bike in Seattle to look at the impacts of sort of how this would work. We had a camera on the bike, and we were able to really get a rich set of data that is not often available when you know, you're testing a new type of technology. So we could see things like where the driver was riding primarily. We have some papers coming out on that. So that was a really fun and collaborative project where everyone kind of got to test their component. And on that theme of kind of multimodality and zero emissions, you know, we got to try out BrightDrop had an electric pallet, which the idea is it would, again, thinking of the final 50 feet, instead of pushing a heavy cart, you can have an electrified or electric assist, maybe in the future automated type of cart that would go with the walker, relieve some of that force and weight, and help them assist to make those walking deliveries on the sidewalk. So we actually loaded that onto the cargo bike to test out sort of how that could work. So those are a few different things. And in terms of moving from pilots to deployment, I do think that pilots and research are just so critical, and you uncover so many things that you maybe didn't think would be a problem, a challenge, or an opportunity when you actually put it on the ground and test it out in real life. And just working from the city side, I think it was eye-opening sometimes to see all the tentacles one project that sort of germinates out of transportation can really impact and affect. So I do think that, you know, we need to be rigorous about our pilots and our research. We need to be willing to have go, no goes, like, should this scale? Should we do this? You know, is this feasible? Oftentimes, you know, pilots just kind of roll into, they become a program, or that's the intent. And I think pilots should really be about questioning everything and really digging in, which is where that kind of research lens can help.
Fantastic. And I think that really illustrates the depth and breadth and the complexity of the freight ecosystem. You know, you touched on the modes and the hubs, and how does that connect from, you know, what Trevor's doing to what you're doing, and how do we really embrace that and provide that continuity? And I think data is a key driver there. So that's something we'll unpack as well. But you did touch on a common thread here, and that's electrification. Trevor, you mentioned that on the Michigan project. And whether that's inductive or wireless power transfer, how do you see what you're doing there being applicable to other installations such as the sidewalk or some of your urban environments?
Yeah. Well, I actually want to flag a formula that we typically use in these situations where we're dealing with the future versus the present, or we're trying to scale something that isn't commonplace today, but it will be. So we've reached across state borders. So we, along with Minnesota, led a 5-state MOU of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, to focus on the future charging infrastructure and to create sort of seamless experiences for medium and heavy duty trucks, whether they're driving from Detroit to Chicago or Chicago to Minneapolis or wherever. And then also within that MOU, create co-investment mechanisms, go after federal money together. And while most of that will be sort of long haul highway driving, there will be a first mile, last mile component to that. And there will be asset development tied to that. And so one of the things we're doing, so I just wanted to, so that's the policy overlay, and that's the first part of the formula. And if you can create that, it begins to drive that I mentioned earlier, regulatory rights of way, and then also asset development. And that asset development really is the second part of that formula. So we've tried to create things that are in some ways first in North America. I'll give you an example, like our smart parking lab in Detroit focuses on the future of the active parking, which actually causes 30% of emissions and congestion in cities. The car only moves 5% of the time. So what about that other 95% of the time? Well, we're rethinking the parking garage as a fulfillment hub, logistics hub with our partners Bosch, Ford, Rocket Mortgage, which isn't a mobility company, but owns a lot of land, as well as Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And as we're thinking about the future of logistics, we're thinking about the future of like autonomous car rental return, which has the same technology platforms that I think you'd probably want to see in an autonomous truck that's entering into its hub. But then also the future of wireless charging while you're parked, the future of proactively running diagnostics while you're parked, and then sort of using that programming to then feed back into the policy, update the policy, unlock the resources, shake the resource tree, whether it's federal government or something else, to then create more assets. So it kind of becomes this circle, and they're somewhat formulaic, and I think it can be replicated not just in electrification, but some of these other core sort of technology platforms, whether it's connected tech, smart tech, hydrogen, or anything else.
And I understand you have a unique view on how freight can really drive the EV adoption. Can you touch on that slightly as well, or?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we think about, I guess, what did you hear? I want to make sure I'm targeted.
Adam might have exposed some stuff, so.
Yeah.
No, just how you can see trucks really supporting the grid health and, using charging as well as.
So, I mean, we very much, and look, up to this point, Michigan has not been a leader in bidirectional charging and energy storage. California, I think, has done some amazing work, along with, frankly, some of our automakers and utilities. But I think we can replicate that in Michigan. I think especially in demand response situations, when the grid goes down or when there are certain aspects of the grid that are weak, we can leverage energy storage technologies. We can leverage bidirectional. Trucks are a big part of that. School buses can be a big part of that. Transit vehicles can be a big part of that. I also think like making sure that and this is for any state, and I don't think we're unique in this, but we do prioritize it. As we're rolling out charging infrastructure for medium and heavy duty, making sure that we're also rolling out fleet adoption programs. You need to pair one with the other. You just do. And so we've rolled out a program, fuel transformation program in Michigan that starts at 30 million and looks to, help convert, some of these diesel trucks, diesel boats, other sorts of buses, transit vehicles into something cleaner. Those are two sides of the same coin. So I think that's what you're referring to, but that's kind of how we're looking at it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. And we're hearing a common thread that, we're addressing technology, goods movements, but there's so many secondary impacts, right? We're reducing emissions, we're increasing the quality of life. So really building that common thread is something that, we really want to rise to the surface. So it's not just economic prosperity, but it's all the other qualities of life that we want to make sure that we're focusing on. Kevin, I'm going to switch to you with, I understand UPS has made a pretty significant investment in the beta EV toll. And how I wanted to talk a little bit about how you plan to incorporate that into part of your delivery model. And can you describe the application and how electrification plays into that strategy?
Yeah, sure. So just feeding off of some of your sustainability comments, UPS has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're surveying, our utilization of fuel across our entire global network and figuring out how we can reduce our dependency and offset that fuel consumption. The Beta technology aircraft called Beta Alia is one small piece to that larger puzzle. But Beta Technologies is an aircraft manufacturing company. They've designed the Beta Alia that can carry 1,400 pounds over 200 miles. The aircraft is fully electric and currently is designed to be a conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, a CTOL, but there's plans to create a vertical takeoff and landing where it can just shoot straight up like a helicopter. And that, believe it or not, has a big impact on how the technology is integrated into a UPS small package network. If you don't need an airport runway, you can do a lot more with the tech. So a couple internal use cases that we have, if you think about a UPS network, which by the way, we probably take for granted, but it's very hub and spoke. To get that package to your house or to your business, it passes through multiple milestones. There are hubs where we sort the packages. There are air gateways where packages are flown in and out. And then a package can touch up to 4, 5, 6 different gateways or milestones throughout its transit. So what if we used eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, to kind of circumvent that network and expedite some of those payloads to and from particular locations? Again, a focus being on healthcare, where speed and reliability is required. So we're looking at our network now and kind of saying, hey, if this tech was deployed at scale, what would it look like and what would the benefits be? And to Kelly's point earlier, a lot of what we're doing is research, and we're still trying to assess a go, no-go decision. We really have to prove out the tech. We have to work with the regulators to make sure that this technology can be integrated into the national airspace. And then there's always that community acceptance. So when I say the challenges are tall, they are. So hearing, Trevor talk about his formula to kind of bring the private sector and the public sector together to push the emerging technology forward, that's very encouraging because we sure have our work cut out for ourselves.
So can I chime in there?
Please.
Kevin, you got me all fired up. So we are my North Star goal is to make my grant dollar go as far as it possibly can. So for every grant dollar, taxpayer dollar I put down, I want to get $1,000 in industry match because it shows us what the market wants. It's a good use of money. It's good use of taxpayer dollars, frankly. And I just, in Michigan, you think about sedans and SUVs, but I mean, we talked to you guys about the project we're doing right now over Southeast Michigan, trying to sort of create the recipe or the playbook for highways in the sky, a drone skyway feasibility study that we're doing with Airspace Link and Telly's and Ford and the province of Ontario. And we see what you're doing in North Carolina and things that are happening in North Dakota. We're we want a piece of the action. Because the truth is, mobility is a $3.3 trillion, industry by 2030, but vehicles are only a sliver of that. There's maintenance, aftermarket, fleet, traffic infrastructure. And then when you look at the growth of VTOL, we can't miss out on that. If you want to lead the world in transportation, you got to lead the world in transportation, not just land transportation. And so I get really excited when you talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. And as we plan the infrastructure of the future, these are considerations that we need to make, right? So as we're looking at moving goods, again, back to our porch to porch concept, it's a fundamental change in the way that we manage our systems and our assets. So this is a great conversation, and I'm going to take it off the sky and down to the curb again. But Kelly, I know you're working on some curb management. This is something I'm passionate about. I was in Miami a couple of weeks ago, and there's no parking, right, for delivery. So I'm really interested in understanding some of the best practices that you're uncovering as it's related to curb management, and how do we take that to a broader scale?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start. We've done quite a bit of work at the lab over the last 5 years or so in this space, again, with our great partners at SDOT. But we have a project right now, a Department of Energy project, where we're working with SDOT and the Pacific Northwest National Lab, and we've had sensors installed in the roadway, the public right-of-way around our commercial vehicle load zones, and we've been doing a number of modeling and experiments kind of with this grant around looking at utilization. PNNL built a reservation app that we were testing out with some private carriers, what this could look like, again, in this very kind of small, dense area of Seattle downtown. And so there's some really interesting findings coming out of that. There's also some follow-on work that we've been doing around modeling. So how do you get to that? You know, you just said there's not enough parking for commercial. How do you start to build kind of models and methodology for public sector to better estimate with this growth in demand? You know, how can they apply that in their city using the models that we're kind of working with other academic partners on? So that's been a really fruitful project. I guess some takeaways that I think are unique. So, you know, the curb tech has been getting a lot of attention lately, I would say, like in the New York Times, and there's just been a lot of kind of buzz on it lately in the last few months, especially. And I think one of our findings and takeaways has been, and this isn't new to transportation people, but, you know, when you put out a new tech, be it a sensor, a Wi-Fi sniffer, whatever, you know, there's inherent challenges to that tech. So cameras, like, you know, whatever the new kind of like vogue technology is of the day, you know, they go down, they need maintenance. They're not always, you know, their uptime isn't 100%. So that's like an obvious thing, but something we're finding out in our research. The other piece is like the quality of what kind of, there's issues, there interference with some of the technology. And that, again, I think applies to any tech from camera, LPR reader to magnometers that we're using. You know, it's imperfect, right? So you've got to build models that clean your data. You've got to look at the quality and, you know, kind of assess its you know, p-value, so to speak. And so that's something that we feel like we want that message to get out wider too, which is like, you're going to have some kind of intermediary and the tooling to support whatever the new technology is. And then just staying on theme trend today, I think bringing in the private partners early and often, and I see, you know, public partners doing this more. You know, the lab's been doing this, and we think this has just been great value when you have trusted partners where you can have honest conversations about like the values and kind of mission on both sides, or the three sides, I guess, with the academic. But really understanding, you know, what's going to be of value to the private sector here. You know, again, in this kind of noisy conversation around curb tech, like what is really going to add value in that, reducing cost, again, reducing circling time, reducing emissions, like how can we really focus on that and really understand what the private sector wants and also what the public sector and their values are trying to achieve as well. And I think you can only do that by coming together super early and super often. And it sounds like we're all kind of aligned on that, but that definitely applies to the curb space too.
No, that's a fantastic segue, and to reference back to what Trevor said, it's taking that $1 of investment and seeing that $1,000 of return, right? And that's how the public and the private agencies can really collaborate to drive that change. And again, leveraging our institutions, the higher education learning. So going to go back to the sky, Trevor or Kevin. I know you're looking at the beyond visual line of sight and some of the regulatory around that, and just wanted to chat about some of the investigations that your solution or that you're looking at there, and what some potential solutions are for that application.
Yeah, so, you know, when it comes to commercial scale and drone operations, one of the big unlocks is being able to fly beyond the operator's line of sight, which is very literal. And the industry hasn't solved that problem yet. There's probably more than one way to kind of consider how to fly safely. And just to give you an idea of the safety, the aircraft, the drone system needs to be able to detect and avoid cooperative and non-cooperative traffic. So you could do that with sensors on the aircraft, whether it be acoustics or cameras. The approach or the focus that UPS has right now is ground radar systems. Ground radar systems are proven technology. They can detect both cooperative and non-cooperative. So some aircraft are reporting their location and some aircraft are not. For example, a hot air balloon doesn't report its location. And we have to be able to avoid both of those air traffic situations. and more. So we're actually investigating, technology that's already trusted within the industry. We have to integrate that technology with the drone system. And then we have to work with the regulators to create the rules and procedures. This is one of the biggest unlocks to economic viability when it comes to drone operations at scale. Other unlocks include remote operations, when that operator is in another state or city. And then the other is one-to-many, when that operator can actually look over multiple flights simultaneously in ratios, for example, 1 pilot to 10 flights, 1 pilot to 20 flights. And that's when the economics of drone delivery come into view, or drone operations. And so those are some of the challenges we're focused on today. When I think about infrastructure and the public sector helping, we have seen some interest in states funding ground radar systems. And to Trevor's point earlier, we actually see a lot of interest in states funding ground charging stations for the larger small feeder aircraft. So no doubt the private and the public need to work together, including academia, to get the data to say, hey, this is the right way to do it. And we're working on it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Going to take it a little bit of a different situation here and talk about the freight mobility ecosystem and so some of the supply chain efficiency. Again, we're talking about specific movements and operations, and just the technology innovations. And I think we've touched on data sharing and how do we facilitate that to really connect the links in this ecosystem, right? So you talked about the hub and spoke model, unique to, or not unique, but specific to UPS. But how do we drive this, again, leveraging that public and private partnerships to drive that adoption? Are there specific areas that we can provide those charging infrastructure? And Trevor, I think you got something to say.
Yeah, well, a single global shipment can involve like 30 different organizations, have like 200 interactions. Often Michigan is a small player in a longer journey, but we want to be the best player. We want to make sure that when you're crossing into our territory as a state, you can make up some time if you lost some in the last state that you were in. And so we very much want to make sure that so my office helped write the plan, I should say, along with MDOT and others. HNTB was very helpful for the NEVI plan, the $110 million in charging infrastructure, and we accounted for freight. Because I think a lot of times when you hear the term range anxiety, it's a consumer problem, or it's framed as a consumer problem, but really it's a business problem. And I want to make sure that, and I know that anyone we've talked to, anyone from other states, especially in the Midwest about NEVI, is that we don't become the place that you lose time on a route, and then you have to make it back if you're a trucker somewhere else across the country. And so last thing I'll add is we got to make sure we have the workforce. We got to make sure that, we have, beyond installing these things, that we have the right teams to maintain them, create safe situations for them to maintain them, and ensure that there's actually a career pathway. And it's not just like a job. And so as we're rolling out these charging stations, we're also thinking about the appropriate training academies. Right now we have an electric vehicle jobs academy, but I mean, we've thought about this academy model in terms of, could we do something around charging infrastructure? Could we do something around then autonomous vehicles? Could we then do something around hydrogen, which it looks like it's going to be something that the trucking industry leads on. So that's an important point that I think is on folks' minds, but it is incumbent upon government to make it a priority.
And I know that's a big part of the NEVI, right, is to continually to train, to make sure that we have the right staff available, whether it's to install or to maintain that.
Well, and I should add too, like one of the things, so we have this Council on Future Mobility, which is like automakers, suppliers, legislators, unions, like bipartisan legislators, I should say, like state departments, and every month they meet to literally be like, this law sucks. This is a law that's setting us back. It's archaic. We need something. We want to disrupt this and make it a little bit easier to roll out innovative technologies that can impact our citizens in a responsible way, of course. And so we're going to be putting out our list of recommendations soon in the coming weeks here. And one of them is around looking at our NEVI, our fuel efficient corridors, and an alternative fuel corridors, and saying like, okay, are we designing this only for battery electric, or are we designing this for whatever comes next too? And the answer is the latter. And so thinking about, okay, as we think about hydrogen infrastructure, how does that play on our alternative fuel corridors that we're using these NEVI dollars on? And that's, I think, the big idea is making sure that if you're committing to a corridor for trucking, it can be relied upon for any future innovation that comes our way in the next 20 years, because Lord knows there's going to be innovations. You think about drones, you think about like rail, like the way that we've constructed our cities are on rail in the 19th and 20th centuries. The truth is, like, that's perfect. In some ways, it matches very nicely to what you'd want to have now, or like, you know, you have these drone skyways that are flying over areas that may not be as heavily populated, similar to how, you know, there's houses by the tracks, but that's not normal usually. And so I think we can learn from the past as well. And that's another big idea is we don't always need to think we don't always need to think fresh. Sometimes we need to just turn around and look at what we've done and build on that. Sorry, I kind of rambled. I apologize. I didn't take up all our time, did I?
No, please.
Okay,
We're here to have a conversation. So,
right.
And I think you touched on a lot of things, right? So having that connectivity, right? So if it's an EV truck and it's getting to the depot where it's then going to transload to another mode, making sure that we're accommodating that, right? Whether it's electrification, whether we're switching from an autonomous vehicle to a driver vehicle, right? How do we have those depots? And does the government support that? Is it purely private? So really continuing to unpack that. And I think breaking that mode of how we've done things in the past and making sure that we're future-proofing it. You hit on a number of pertinent topics there. You know, automation, it can add efficiencies into the supply chain. And I just like to go around the room and maybe start with you, Kevin, if there's anything you'd like to add as far as how you see automation. You talked about the number of drone operators, you know, increasing from 1 to 10. Do you see moving into a pure autonomous environment there, or is that anything that you want to touch on at this point, or?
So autonomy at UPS means a few different things. I mean, we have some autonomous warehouses where we sort packages. So autonomy means can have big impact on our efficiency. I want to think about it from the lens of drones. I think about the laws and regulations, and I'm hopeful that the future is accepting of autonomous drone operations. In order to be successful, I think about the regulatory landscape. And just this Monday, there was actually a new law passed that actually helps build a structure within the FAA to further look into autonomous operations. And it goes really deep into like cybersecurity and like, let's see what else, federal investment in the ecosystem for passenger carrying aircraft. Unless the government is structured to kind of research and understand the industry, we're not going to get the changes we need to fly in this airspace. So that to me was a big first step. I've been at this since 2019, and it felt like we were getting support from the government, but without a structure, without resources that specialize in this new technology, it's been really slow going. But this is some recent news from Monday that really show a change within the government that should support the advancement of this emerging technology.
And I think it's conversations like this that help educate, right, our legislative authorities to understand what this technology is, the safety that it brings, the quality of life, and the general economic support that it can provide. Trevor, do you have any specific AV mobility testing that's going on in Michigan that you'd like to describe?
Yeah, I mean, you could say I'm biased, but I think we have the best portfolio of testing sites of any state or region in the world. And you know, you could argue that one of the crown jewels of that testing site network in Michigan is the American Center for Mobility. And they're doing a lot of interesting work right now and have some very interesting partners like Daimler focus on the future of trucking in various environments, artificial environments, such as, they have a high-speed loop, tunnel, even they've built like the wireless canyon. Sometimes you can't get signal in a city for whatever reason. And so they're sort of behind the fence type tests that you need to have. But then also, you know, we have various grant programs around the state that will look at a community and a mobility challenge. Oftentimes it can be like a first mile, last mile transit problem or something that's sort of person based, but there are also a few that are actually goods based, where we will pilot drone technology. We recently did something with Beaumont and Airspace Link to deliver sort of medicine between a hospital and a lab. So I know that's not like trucking per se, but it's an example of goods movement where the state came in, knew that there needed to be some money seeded to get the deployment off the ground. And then from there, you can begin to build a sustainability model for whatever you're trying to move in the future. And we actually like, we have I mentioned this earlier, we have a program with Ontario around smart infrastructure that's going to be exclusive to, I think, like making sure that we can improve throughput on the bridge, and that's entirely going to be a truck story. And so I would open for anyone listening, if there are very interesting technologies that you'd want to test or deploy in Michigan, I think we have some new assets coming online. We also have like an airport innovation lab that does various grant rounds of deploying new technologies, either for helping passenger travel, but even any sort of goods delivery via air to ground. So let's talk. Like, you're on here to make connections. Like, let's connect.
Yeah. And Kelly, we've been silent with you for a little while, so I'd like to reach out to you as well. And you did bring up some automation support that you're working on and some of the data around that. And I know that's something that we've looked at from a modeling perspective is what are the impacts of those AV, how is that moving around? And I'd just like to hear from you on that.
Sure. I was going to build off Kevin too. Earlier, he said, he was excited about a new arm within FAA, which, most private sector, you don't hear them say, yes, I'm excited. The regulators are building out their office. But yeah, that's kind of one of my little sayings is you can't regulate or manage what you don't understand. And I do think, obviously I'm biased, but research helps fill that in. But just in general, like education on these things and sort of more transparency between some of these newer technology, operators and designers and innovators with public and academia, so that we can kind of dig in. I think some of the big questions I have around automation in, outside of the warehouse, I think there's a lot of opportunity inside these fulfillment centers, but is just like the use cases and human behaviors. Having worked on the city side, it's adding more things to the sidewalk or the bike lane or the travel lanes, and then I'm not even thinking about drones, but understanding that and digging in, I think there is great opportunity, but it's like, again, to that application and right sizing the tech with like the problem it's solving. I think we have to really dig in and answer those questions about what are the right fits for the right kind of modes and device types and form factors, and automation is sort of a layer within that. And I'm excited to see more research and more study and more collaborations in the space, specifically focusing on urban goods movement and freight.
Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, Kelly, that's a great point. First of all, thank you for characterizing my statements a lot better than I did. But to your point, just because the technology is available and the regulations are supportive, doesn't mean we understand how to integrate the tech into existing process and procedure. And so whether it's an autonomous ground vehicle, robot, or drone, it requires a whole new customer journey. How is the customer interacting with that tech? And to be honest, we're just scratching the surface on that. And it's really interesting. So, maybe you can deliver something in 15 minutes, but how do you know the retailer has that product available, picked and packed and ready for shipment in 2 or 5 minutes? And some of those are the problems we have to solve as this technology comes into view.
Just checking real quick. I haven't seen a lot of questions come in, so just want to encourage the audience if there's anything they do want to ask. And I think we're touching on something here, right? It's where the tech meets the application, right? So we've got everybody developing all these great things, but how do we apply those? How do we do those in a collaborative manner that supports everybody in an equitable manner? Looking not only at the urban landscape, but the the rural communities as well, right? So we look at those disadvantaged communities and really understanding how that can be applied across the board uniformly. As we wind this down, I really want to just kind of talk about, each of you play a critical role. We've got the government, we've got the private, we've got the public. How can we really drive this? What's that one key element that we can really make sure that we look at the ecosystem as a whole and really continue to engage and collaborate those public-private relationships? And Kelly, I know this is something we talked about last week, and I'd like you to lead this off.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm obviously biased, but I think having these forums where, conversations like this, but also forums like the Urban Freight Lab. And again, I'm not just saying this because Kevin is here, like UPS in particular has been a really great partner and does data sharing with the lab, and really is just, I think, trying to bring that research lens and like ask the hard questions. So I think we need more partners like that. We need more outlets for this type of collaboration. And some of the things Trevor was talking about seems like they're doing some really interesting stuff. Ford's also in the lab, and Bosch, and y'all are doing work with them. So you start to see some of these familiar faces, and I think that's great. And I think they're showing real leadership in how you build your technology with application that the public sector both values and can help fund and support and sort of elevate, right? Because it does require everyone at the end of the day, especially with a focus on safety and some of this new technology. It's, there's going to be a regulatory component to it, no doubt. And we need, we want to make sure we're all doing it right together.
Yeah, Trevor, it looked like you wanted to weigh in, but I think it goes back to that acceptance too, right? I think, Kevin gave us a great use case of where we might not have expected that population to be as accepting to the technology, but having those champions for us. So, Trevor?
Yeah, you make a really good point about safety. I think too, like, there are tough conversations to be had with like the Teamsters about automation, and like there are organizations and systems, and going back to the people. So as we roll out this technology, we need to make sure that instead of pushing unions away, we look and say like, hold on, you guys have these world-class training platforms. Like, how can we leverage these world-class training platforms to get folks up to speed on what the jobs of the future in trucking is going to be? Or drones, like, so you operate, 10 drones or 10 trucks at a time, versus one. You get to stay home or have regular hours. You might get paid more. There's a next job waiting for you and a job after that, or whatever other job is out there at that logistics hub. Whether it's in a city or in the middle of nowhere next to a big battery plant. I think like we need to make sure that we're bringing along the systems, the organizations that have got us to this point. It's one thing to sort of disrupt policy. It's one thing to disrupt the status quo, change the paint line marks on a road. It's another thing to displace folks that have actually gotten you to the point that like you are at. Instead, these are massively wise groups of people that can take you to the next level quicker. So I know we've talked a lot about the actual tech, but I think the systems around that got us to this tech are equally, in some cases, important.
And it goes back to the conversation you had too about the way that communities were developed in the past around, whether it was a rail and the development that occurred around that. But as we look at the infrastructure and the distribution of those goods, maybe our ports aren't so congested and we move those inland using some of this emerging technology. And Kevin, I see you wanted to weigh in here.
Trevor brought up labor, and UPS is a union shop, right? We have the Teamsters. My father was a Teamster. I have a great deal of respect for what our operators do day in and day out. Throughout the pandemic, UPS never missed a beat. And I do think it's easy to get excited and hyped up about this autonomous technology that could be disruptive to the labor force. However, based on my experience over the past 3 or 4 years, I don't think it's going to scale to a really significant degree. I think there are niche opportunities where the technology can be integrated and applied to add to the service, to create additional jobs. I don't think the tech can completely replace the manual labor that's out there today. And in terms of working that out, getting past the hype, we got to put the hype aside and really have open communications with these different organizations, private, public, educational, because I think we all have like this tribal knowledge based on our backgrounds. And I think we take it for granted. We don't share our experiences as much as we should. So, getting on these calls, sharing our experience, building out that network. I think we're still defining what good looks like. And we can't make everyone happy, but it's really important that we break out of our silos to make sure that we're not creating more downside than up. The benefits have to be there for all.
I was going to add on to that. That's great, Kevin. I was just going to add, we're starting to do some interesting research around sort of inequitable impacts of last mile. So when you look at where urban distribution fulfillment centers are located, and you actually start to differentiate between e-commerce purchasing patterns and sort of where disproportionate like pollution and climate impacts are happening near the warehouses where there's higher frequency of EMT and travel. So, again, that's not to say, oh, we'll just rebuild our city. To Trevor's point, we're not going to rebuild our cities. Like the warehouses may need to stay in certain places, but I think it's to that point about sharing between sectors, like for the public sector to understand this and the private sector, maybe when you're making a change, targeting areas where you can kind of lift up first or like minimize your impact the most in certain areas. I think there's opportunity for that, again, if we're all talking and sharing knowledge together.
No, that's a great point there, especially as we look at our equity concerns and how we do go about rolling this out. Maybe it's somewhere easier, right? So we go build that proof of concept and then apply it in one of those more challenging areas. Trevor, did you want to weigh in here?
You're very good at like reading my mind when I want to, like Kelly, usually what happens is Kelly says something really smart and then I'm like, hell yeah. And then I come in and I have to like pile on. And I'm going to do that now. So I think you made a really interesting point about the future of trucking, both sort of first electrifying the platforms we use, but then also then leveraging autonomous features to make them smarter will also unlock new ways to redesign our communities and potentially like find efficiencies that would remove a truck from going through a neighborhood and the neighborhood ends up being a victim of heavy emissions, impacts, kids in that neighborhood. I mean, there are different things that I think we can unlock over the next decade that will literally help us redesign our cities. And I think, Kelly, you said a few keywords there that sort of like got me going on that. But yeah, sorry to interrupt. Back to you.
No, absolutely. It's that fundamental change management, right? Rethinking the way that we go about doing business. It's not the interstate of the past. It's the interstate of the future with what you're doing with CAVNU and how do we really reimagine what we're doing? It's that disruptive force and leveraging it for good. So we're running up on time. So I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to, if there's one thing that you'd like the audience to take away from here, what would that be? And I'll go back to you, Trevor.
Oh, all right. I'm just gonna get like a
throw you on the spot.
thing.
So
yeah. I think I have to say this maybe as a public sector official, as a reminder, I would hope that like 2 or 3 years from now, when you ask this question, I wouldn't say this, but like trucking logistics is a priority for state government. It is, like, hands down. And I don't know if it was before, but the pandemic totally like exposed some very serious issues. And now we are thinking of it as a policy priority, but also a funding priority. And you're seeing that at the federal government as well, or within the federal government as well. And so if ever, I think it seems as though states are forgetting about the movement of goods, speak up, because we don't want to be in the same situation we were in 2020. And a lot of big decisions that are going to impact the next 50 years of our roads, of our infrastructure, going to be made in the next 10 years. And so speak up now, or else you're going to have to deal with something for 30, 40 years and work around it for 30, 40 years.
That's a fantastic point. And Kelly, do you want to have some closing comments there?
Oh man, I guess we'll all just do a PSA. Something that's on my mind lately, because we're working on some stuff with our state government or state office as well. just thinking about, you know, how your shopping behaviors are also part of your own transportation kind of footprint. And I think coming out of the city where we focused a lot on commute trip, which the pandemic basically like threw a grenade in to sort of the old way of commuting and travel for most people, I think just kind of how can we build out both the research literature, but also like sort of everyday knowledge around what your shopping and e-commerce patterns are doing kind of in your area, be that in urban areas, or we're even interested in looking at exurban and rural, because there's very different land use and transportation patterns there. So just thinking about that as part of your transportation footprint, as part of your climate footprint is what I'll leave the group on today. That's not really from the UFL, but that's from Kelly.
That's why we're here. So, Kevin.
All right, I would just say that, you know, no one's getting a pizza delivered anytime soon via drone. It's going to take a while for advanced air mobility to really be adopted and scale across the country. But I do believe it's a matter of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So it is coming, and the private sector, public sector, we're working to make sure that it brings the most value and benefit to local communities.
We're right up on time, so I thank you guys for your participation today, and you know, this is a wonderful conversation, and hopefully we'll see you next month in LA.
Thanks, Craig. Great job.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Craig.
All right, thanks.